In this video, I'll be going over the top 10 Pokemon you should always catch in Pokemon GO. If you want to get ahead in this game, there are a ton of different Pokemon that will help you get there. However, for one reason or another, many players will ignore plenty of these particular Pokemon as they play the game every day. This can be a huge mistake, as any of these Pokemon can evolve into some of the most powerful Pokemon you can have, or they can net you a ton of Stardust and Experience. Hopefully, you will find this video helpful as you continue your journey in Pokemon GO. Number 10. Trubbish. Now this trash Pokemon is very much just that, trash. It's going to be very difficult to make the argument that Trubbish, or its evolved form Garbodor, are useful in any way. The reason why you should always catch this Pokemon, however, is of course because it has a huge Stardust bonus. Among all of the unevolved Pokemon that you can catch in the wild, Trubbish is one of those Pokemon that can give you a huge boost in the amount of Stardust. That is because it gives you 750 Stardust, with even more if you have a star piece or if it is weather boosted. Because Trubbish is boosted by cloudy weather, which is a very common weather boost, this Pokemon will almost always give you a huge amount of Stardust no matter what. Needless to say, this is one Pokemon you should never ignore. Number 9. Chimecho. Now interestingly, Chimecho is one of those Pokemon that the average player who doesn't know better will tend to ignore. This is because, from a gameplay point of view, there aren't too many situations where this Pokemon will be useful. It's not a powerful Pokemon for raids, the Go Battle League, or gym defense. It is also notoriously difficult to catch, as it has a higher than usual base catch rate, and it tends to move around quite frequently. Of course, veteran players will tell you that this is a huge mistake. Not only is Chimecho a very rare shiny, but it is one of those Pokemon that gives bonus Stardust when you catch it. In fact, Chimecho gives you some of the highest amount of bonus Stardust compared to others that give extra Stardust per catch. It gives you a base amount of 1000 Stardust, which is equivalent to catching 10 basic Pokemon that are not weather boosted. This is pretty huge for getting Stardust, and you should always stop and catch these Pokemon whenever you see them on screen. Number 8. Pseudo Legendary Basics. This entry is pretty straightforward, as pseudo legendaries like Dragonite, Metagross, Garchomp, and Tyranitar are some of the most powerful non-legendary Pokemon currently in the game. If you are lucky, you might come across the basic version of these Pokemon in the wild, like Dratini, Beldum, Gible, and Larvitar. In some cases, they can also be a common wild spawn tied to an in-game event. Without question, you should always be catching these Pokemon whenever they are on screen, regardless if you need them or not. This is because the final evolution of most of these Pokemon are extremely powerful for raids, the Go Battle League, and gym battles, and a handful of them even have Mega Evolutions. It is always beneficial to have a ton of candy for these Pokemon on hand, especially if you are looking to max them out with XL Candy. So unless you have an army full of maxed out Dragonites already in your collection, you should catch as many of those Dratini as you can, even if you may not need them right away. At one point in the future, you will not regret it. Number 7. Starter Pokemon. Now the same philosophy for those pseudo legendary basic Pokemon can also be applied to starter Pokemon. The main reason for this is of course Community Day moves. The potential for each and every fully evolved starter Pokemon will always be innately high because the Community Day move will always be either Hydro Cannon for water types, Blast Burn for fire types, and Frenzy Plant for grass types. These moves will always elevate these starter Pokemon to potentially be a meta staple in the Go Battle League. Sure, some starters may not reach those potentials compared to others, but anything can change in the ever-evolving Go Battle League metas. A Blaziken may not be a great PvP Pokemon now, but it might swing into relevance with the introduction of other moves that you can give it alongside Blast Burn in the future. Especially for some of those starters that still have not received a Community Day, you should always be catching as many starters as you can without ignoring them. Number 6. Eevee. Probably one of the more popular entries on this list, Eevee is one of those Pokemon that can be useful in almost any situation in Pokemon GO. Of course, Eevee itself may not be all that useful, minus the occasional specialty cup in the Go Battle League, but it can evolve into several different powerful Pokemon that will certainly help you get ahead. Some of the notable Eevee evolutions include Umbreon, Sylveon, Espeon, and Glaceon. For Umbreon, this Pokemon is a solid choice for the Great League in the Go Battle League. It is extremely tanky, has a powerful moveset, and doesn't require too many resources to get battle ready. Now for raiders, Espeon and Glaceon will be powerful against most legendary raid bosses. This is of course because they have really high damage outputs and they have some very powerful moves that are strong against most dragons. And finally, Sylveon is surprisingly one of the best gym attackers or defenders in the game, on top of being a strong raid damage dealer. This is because some of the most common gym attackers and defenders are weak against fairy types, and you can synergize with powerful defenders like Blissey and Chansey with this Pokemon. Each Eevee evolution requires 50 Eevee candy and a specific condition to be met. It would be in your best interest to always catch these Pokemon whenever you see them, as having as much Eevee candy as possible on hand will always best prepare you for when you need any of Eevee's evolutions. Number 5. Go Battle League Pokemon. Now this entry could be a list in and of itself. There are plenty of Pokemon that are phenomenal for the Go Battle League, specifically for the Great League. Pokemon like Skarmory, Sableye, Hypno, Azumarill, and Stunfisk are always part of the Great League meta. Therefore, it is in your best interest to constantly catch these Pokemon whenever you see them. Likewise, certain IVs are absolutely essential if you want to maximize your team's effectiveness. However, getting these specific IVs is going to be extremely difficult and a rare occurrence. Thus, catching as many of these PvP Pokemon as you can will allow you to eventually hit it lucky with these specific IVs. If you want more information on what Pokemon are good for the Go Battle League and what IVs are the most ideal for each of them, I highly suggest you check out pvpoke.com. It is probably the absolute best resource for PvP in Pokemon Go. Number 4. Evolved Pokemon. There are several reasons why you should never ignore fully evolved Pokemon in the wild, regardless if you need them or not. For one, evolved Pokemon give more experience and Stardust compared to their basic forms. They also give XL candies, which for some Pokemon could be the difference between whether they are irrelevant or a top meta pick. However, because evolved Pokemon are typically harder to catch, most players will opt to just flat out ignoring them, especially if their ball supply is limited. But if you are able to land great and excellent curveball throws and have an excess of raspberries, it might be worth catching these evolved Pokemon if not for the Stardust alone. Depending on what stage of evolution that Pokemon is, you can get anywhere from 300 to 500 Stardust from that catch. It's pretty insane how much Stardust you can get by never ignoring these Pokemon in the wild. Number 3. Shellder and Cloyster. Believe it or not, Shellder and Cloyster are two Pokemon you should always catch in Pokemon Go. The reason for this is because both of these Pokemon get you so much Stardust when you catch them. Like many other Pokemon on this list, Shellder and Cloyster give a massive Stardust bonus. Thus, it is absolutely imperative that you catch them whenever you see them. You should also keep an eye out for any Team Go Rocket shakeups, because sometimes they will have Shellder as a possible grunt encounter. This means that if you were to defeat that grunt and catch the Shadow Pokemon, you could net yourself 1500 Stardust from that single encounter. It's a lot of Stardust for very little effort. Number 2. Pidgey. Now for newer players, this could be a very surprising entry on this list, but Pidgey is by far one of the most important Pokemon that you should catch for a very specific reason. In order to reach the final trainer level of 50, you are required to get an insane amount of experience points. One of the best and fastest ways you can get experience is by throwing on a lucky egg and evolving as many Pokemon as possible. Of course, one of the roadblocks for doing this is having enough candies to evolve a bunch of one particular Pokemon. Fortunately, Pidgey is one of those Pokemon that is incredibly common, and evolving it to Pidgeotto only requires a minuscule amount of candy. Of course, it's not just Pidgey that falls into this category. There's other Pokemon like Weedle, Caterpie, Spearow, Sentret, Pidove, Whismur, Machop, Tailo, and Wurmple. They are common enough for you to get a high amount of candy that will allow you to evolve them en masse and collect an insane amount of experience. Number 1. Audino. And finally, we get to the number 1 Pokemon that you should always catch. Without question, Audino is one of the best single sources of getting Stardust in Pokemon GO when it comes to catching. Each Audino you catch will net you a minimum of 2100 Stardust. This can be multiplied with Stardust bonuses, star pieces, and weather boosts. Audino is also one of the rarest spawns that you can come across in the wild, and it will eventually have a Mega Evolution released into the game, which will require a ton of candy to power up a good one in your collection. Thus, anytime you see an Audino, you absolutely need to stop what you are doing and catch it. Keep in mind that Audino has one of the lowest base catch rates currently in the game. Thus, expect to use berries and Ultra Balls in order to catch it. But I will tell you right now, the massive Stardust gains alone will be well worth it. Alright, and there you have it. These were the top 10 Pokemon you should always catch when you see them in Pokemon GO. But let me know your thoughts. Is there any particular Pokemon that you always catch? What Pokemon do you think should have been on this list? Let me know in the comment section below, and let's have a great discussion. And if you found this video to be helpful, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe if it's your first time here. I am Count Jinsula. Be safe, have fun, love yourself, and I will catch you all later.